March 25th special session.
All right. Thank you, Danny. We'll call this special meeting of the Marion County Board of Supervisors to order. Roll call. Danny.
Keisha Johnner.
Here.
Mark Ramey.
Here.
Steve McCombs.
Here.
Very good. I would entertain a motion to approve this morning's special agenda.
Make motion to approve today's special agenda.
Second.
McCombs.
Aye.
Ramey.
Aye.
Johnner.
Aye.
Very good. Thank you. Carla, it's all yours.
Great. Welcome, everybody. Before we get started, I thought I'd give you a little bit of update on a couple events we have coming up that I think should be of interest to most folks. First, on March 31st, we have an event that is a listening session put on by the Kauffman Foundation and the Kansas City Leadership Institute or Council. They're going around several Midwestern states listening to entrepreneurs and people who work with entrepreneurs to understand better some of the barriers for entrepreneurial development in rural America, or rural Midwest at least. And so it's an opportunity for folks to come in and share their thoughts about what makes it difficult for entrepreneurs to succeed, what makes it easy, perhaps what are the assets. Their hope is to take all this information from the listening sessions, and I just realized, I apologize, I spelled listening wrong. And they are going to take those, put those together, and hopefully develop some type of pilot program to then help rural areas in the 4 states that they're working in. So it's an opportunity to have your voice heard and to meet with some very amazing people from the Kauffman Foundation and the Kansas City Leadership Council. So that's March 31st at 8 o'clock at P Street. The exciting event is April 7th. That is the Redrock Startup event. It's a pitch contest. We have 6 companies in Marion County that will be pitching off for prizes. It will be a way to connect to resource providers for small businesses and startup businesses. It will be at 5:30 at the Gathering Ground. You can see those businesses if you've watched Shark Tank, very similar thing. We will have judges. It will be just a fun overall night to celebrate these small businesses. Some are existing, some are startup, but most of the existing ones are all new. They're less than 3 years old, so an exciting night. Then on April 18th, we will be announcing the Best of Redrock in the top 10 under 40. That announcement event will be at 3:30 out at Cordova Park at the Cordova Pavilion. So a lot of exciting economic development things coming up within the next month. Next, I'm going to turn it over to Dustin to give us an update on some of the research that he did for Marion County as far as grants. So, Dustin?
Yeah.
If you just use the clicker here, over there, it will advance the slide.
Good to see you guys again.
Good to
I
see
think
you.
there's a new mural through town that I hadn't seen, which is kind of cool.
Yeah.
And I gave this presentation, I think, in December timeframe. And still, the information's good. And for those folks that weren't here in December, different opportunities that are out there, and then we can talk further about, what the process is for them. I'm Dustin Miller. I'm an attorney at the Nymaster Law Firm. I also serve as the Iowa Chamber Alliance Executive Director. So I interface, especially at the Capitol, related to policy issues on tax and economic development incentives. Oh, here we go, sorry. Generally, when I'm talking to communities about accessing programs, whether it be loans, grants, or other programmatic things, the biggest key is planning and preparation. So when we first started on this project, having the 3 separate things that were focused for the county, that's a big component of identifying in the long term what are projects that you want to make investments in. And that's key because typically especially if you're really looking for grants, being prepared to apply is the biggest key, rather than trying to marshal resources at the back end once an application is out. And the reason for that is the turnaround time can be tricky if you haven't planned and prepared. And a lot of times, especially like a RAISE grant that I've talked about before, which is the old Tiger grants from DOT, the application process looks similar year after year. So you have the opportunity to get an application, 80% of the way there, So when the next round of funding that comes out, that's typically annual or biannual, we're ready to go by the time. That's a big component. Also, one of the things we talked about is just the coordination between your different local government entities and the private entities in this is also important. You know, I'm dealing with a grant that's due April 11th that I will do most of my rest of my day. And that was, we got all the local government entities ready to go. And so my afternoon will be just writing template of support letters so that they're ready to go in the queue, which is one thing that I get off my checklist before the due date on April 11th. The other thing that I think is hard, especially for communities who have not gotten into searching for grants and loans, is everybody wants to go find that singular program that fixes your whole project. And if it's a small project, that is maybe achievable. But typically, especially for large scale redevelopments, large scale developments, you're going to have to get comfortable with layering resources and finding different resources for maybe different aspects of a project. And I'll give an example of that later on. Also is thinking about this from a creativity on to create budget flexibility. You know, if in your capital infrastructure planning, do you have the ability that if you can find a grant to offset some sort of funding, does that free up budgetary amounts that you can utilize in the same space? And that might not be necessarily directed at the project itself. It could be just the ability to find the budgetary match for one of the programs that you're searching for. So the three sites that I'll go through, the Knoxville VA site, for those folks that the supervisors know this, I grew up in Lacona. My mom retired from VA. My dad actually tore all the insides out after her retirement. He was a scrapper after he retired. Very interested in the development of that, and I'm excited for the future of what you can do with that site here in the community. Tax increment finance is always, the easiest option. It's the easiest tool in the state from a development standpoint. This is a city within the city limits, so typically, the city is going to take the lead. However, what I have seen in some projects is where the county says, you know what, we'll cover your public finance costs. We'll cover the interest on the loans. We will, just pay for the bond counsel that does your review, just so that it's shown as a partnership in those efforts. That's something to consider. Other programs that are out there, I know in this one in particular, you're looking at housing. A lot of the programs that are out there are developer driven. So it's who's going to land on the property and what they're going to do. Redevelopment tax credits, that's what sometimes you hear is brownfield, grayfield. In this instance, it's most likely a grayfield. I don't think that I haven't done the research. I don't think that there would be, underlying nasty hazardous chemicals underneath. I think those are getting removed. But, a grayfield. Now, when I talk about layering, typically in a developer-driven project that's large, you're going to have not only a redevelopment tax credit, you might also have a historic preservation if there's an existing building that you're rehabbing. And I know that some of the buildings are going to stay on site. Redeveloping those, you might have an opportunity for a historic preservation. For the housing side, workforce housing tax credits, which isn't on there, that got a massive bump last year at the legislature. They got rid of it. It was about a $40 million queue of people waiting to access it. They'll get rid of that backlog over a 2-year time period, and then moving forward, it actually gave an increase in funding. And that, I'll talk a little bit about, the volume build side and, why that's important from a workforce housing tax credit, especially in communities that as you get further outside of more urbanized parts of the state. One of the things we talked about in December continues to be out there is this USDOT. It's the RAISE grants, and as I said, it's the old Tiger grants. That seems to have a lot of flexibility on the infrastructure side, and is something that a lot of communities use for that. Also, on the grant side, from an infrastructure standpoint that I didn't talk about in December, is each governor of each state was given pockets of money. If you were above a certain population threshold, this local state money was given directly to counties and cities. None of our cities and counties in the state of Iowa were large enough, so the governor gets to do that. The easiest method for accessing that funds within the authorized purposes of ARPA is infrastructure and water in particular. So any of these projects going into the governor's office, I did it twice this week with different clients. They're looking for projects to support water, the water infrastructure side. So that again could be a joint ask with you and the city, going and saying, hey, we know that we need, in order to build these homes, $2 million in additional infrastructure, water infrastructure, to make sure that the development is there. That's something that's out there now, and I'd recommend getting in with the governor's office as quickly as possible, and I can give Kelly the contact within the governor's office to do that. And also, yes,
Stop
sir.
there for a second. When you say water infrastructure, can you give me a little more color on that?
Water or wastewater. So
Okay.
when you go to build out there, right, one of the things that I think, as Carla knows, that people don't think about, they're like, oh, we have this great green field, let's just go stick a major manufacturer out there. Well, if you don't have water, wastewater, electricity, and now telecom, the likelihood of you landing something is very low. So again, not only on the programmatic aspect of planning and preparation, that's why people do, site ready, industrial parks.
Sure.
Because, so that when somebody, that it's not a question, that they can plug and play once they jump in. And interestingly enough, and I'm sure your manufacturers around here, the community, in fact, I know Pella and Vermeer in particular, what they're finding is, we all know that there's a labor shortage in this country, low, medium, high skill. So some of what they're doing is replacing some jobs with automation. If you do that, typically the speeds at which you need on the telecom side are pretty huge to operate the machines.
Right.
And that's not necessarily just to replace employees. It's also what you find, it's pretty fascinating stuff if you interact with Pella or Vermeer in particular. Tim Yagi, I've talked to a number of times, is the heat mapping aspect is really cool that they're starting to do, because they can take their workforce and say, hey, what's happening within it? And what you find is, as many of us experienced, when you were, for me, a fry cook at McDonald's, that nobody wanted to do that job, right? So they stick the brand new person doing that, and it's awful, and you burn yourself, right? Same kind of principle in a manufacturing facility is you send the new person to the job that's the worst. Well, the problem is that person says, this is awful, I'm gonna go do something else, which is bad for the company, because then you lose. So if you can find the ability, especially for those hard, and it's not necessarily physically intensive, sometimes it's mentally, it's, doing the same thing.
Tedious.
Yeah, if you can replace that with automation, you're not losing the track of employees within your workforce. That, it isn't somebody coming in saying, this whole place is awful, I'm going to leave. It's getting those jobs out of the way so that it works. But you can't do that automation without pretty heavy telecom boards. And that's why we pushed really hard last year for 100, because it wasn't necessarily related to the residential telecom, it was related to supporting, in particular, manufacturing.
Okay. Kelly, this sounds like an interesting one.
Yeah, Mark, if you could pass that information along to us, we would be
I think,
more than
yeah.
happy to.
Yep, that's one we need to pursue a little bit.
Okay. And then these other two are always out there and available. The RISE grants at DOT, there's two components of that. Immediate opportunity. So there's always a, hey, kind of like the site prep side of things. That's always out there available. The amount is not as much as an immediate opportunity, but an immediate opportunity has to be, we've got a business that wants to expand. But that's always out there and available. And in economic development projects I work in, I've never really run into a situation where there isn't money in that. It's just a matter of knowing when you need it.
So when you say immediate opportunity, Dustin, are you thinking like a letter of intent, some type of?
Yeah, it's somebody saying, yeah.
Some general understanding, MOU type of agreement that says, hey, we're going to do this if you have these things in place, and if you fall short of one, deals off.
And in economic development deals, a lot of times too, there's a layering within those.
Yep.
They're getting a high quality job award from IEDA, they're doing
Yeah,
this,
you're gonna
and
have
then
so
we
many,
add in a
yep.
RISE grant too. And a lot of times too, I just did this in Cedar Rapids, it's IEDA actually jointly, signing off on your
Right.
application. because it's an immediate opportunity where we know we have 120 jobs that are
Okay.
gonna land there.
All right, no, that
Yep.
clarifies.
And then
Thank you.
community attraction, tourism, and Carla will tell you, this is always out there. It's way underfunded. It's oversubscribed. It's highly competitive. But this is one of those where you put in the back burner where you're putting an application in year after year and eventually it hits. But it can be a very frustrating, and that's, I think, generally, as Carla would tell you, the frustrating aspect of this is you have to be okay with failure, especially if you're seeking grants. But eventually, if you get it, the ability to offset costs is pretty tremendous.
Hey, Dustin.
Yeah.
On the Knoxville, on the VA, is there any opportunity out there for electric and gas that you know of? Because we have to, the city's gonna have to put electric and gas in there. Do you know of any, right now, like even in broadband, I know currently those companies, were seeking the funding.
Mhm.
It would be neat if there was opportunity where there were just opportunities for development that you could apply for it. And you could locate those funds for that project.
Yeah.
Do you know of anything out there for any of those?
Yes, the telecom side in particular is the governor's they've already had this, the legislature authorized 100 million.
Yeah, but I thought it was more for just those certain, so like we have Iowa Telecom here, or Windstream, sorry, not Iowa Telecom, it used to be Iowa Telecom, but Windstream, and if they didn't get that funding,
So
then
Windstream is ineligible because they're one of the large.
Right.
However, there's also the ability for somebody like yourself to say, we're gonna go build the infrastructure and you would be eligible.
Right.
That's the
Okay.
concept behind it.
okay,
The people who typically went and got it, the vast majority were rural telecoms. But there's no reason from an eligibility standpoint, you couldn't say, we just want a small application for X. But again, if you remember, the legislature put 100 million, I believe, last year.
right,
Then the governor put another 150 million. The reason she was able to do that is she has this flexibility with the ARPA money on infrastructure. So again, I think walking in and asking for, hey, we have infrastructure needs at this site. And when we say infrastructure, to Mark's point, we mean internet, electric, water, wastewater. And on the electric side in particular, I in this ask generally, I would talk to your utility provider, which is this mid-am territory.
Yeah.
no,
And I'm happy if you can, and I'm sure many folks in here know Catherine Cooner, and working with Catherine and working with mid-am, I mean, they'll support that kind of operation because again, if you land a bunch of houses there, if you land some businesses there, they sell more power, it's better for them.
Right.
So.
Very good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Next, I put this slide in here just from and we talked about this in December. It's just to understand, I'm not gonna read this whole thing, but it's really kind of a conversation I had with a guy, and maybe some folks know People's Company, Steve Brewer. He builds homes, and this is a discussion he had. He did the project in Newton, he did the project in Sheridan. We're basically just helping communities that aren't within kind of the circle of a larger urban area. Is the reality for him to bring his team out and build, volume builds, whether it's townhouses or a lot of, houses, all is typically in smaller communities, you don't have somebody building a volume build, building 10 houses a summer, 20 houses a summer. And his whole point is he won't bring his team to a community unless it makes sense. Well, in the 17 communities directly in the Des Moines area, he doesn't have to ever leave and gets very few incentives. There's an abatement aspect. He doesn't have to do very much, and the houses are sold before he even starts building. And to take that risk, you have to essentially kind of tweak the market to make it an incentive for him to do that. And these are some of the things that he's talked about that in these communities is, and it takes a whole community effort in smaller communities. Now, one of the things we talked about in December, though, is you do have a chance, better chance just because of the proximity to Des Moines. Your population growth is 75% of the net population growth of the entire state from 2010 to 2020 was in the Des Moines metro area. So, and that's the reality, right? But the beauty of it is your not that far out in a certain ring where you have a chance at a population growth. So the coming together is a whole lot easier in fitting some of these and getting, that it isn't their money, that it's, maybe a local bank is partnering as a revolving loan fund. You have an easier chance of doing that than maybe Centerville, right, or Alpia, just because of proximity.
Right. So this would be very much akin to our Prairie Ridge project.
Yep.
Pelham.
Correct.
It's almost
Correct.
exactly what we did.
Correct. You find a developer, what do you need to be in this community? What do you need to build?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And this is a menu that, not to say everything there has to be there, but I think it's ultimately what I see, not necessarily in any of your projects, but what I see is kind of short-term thinking sometimes from communities of, well, this is county-owned land, 100 acres. We don't want to just give it away. Not grasping that, okay, so maybe you get $500,000 at the front end, but if the deal doesn't work out, what you're giving up on is the property taxes that if you were to just give the land away, what you get in the back end from a property tax standpoint. And you have to analyze your community and your business and how to operate this. But ultimately, all this said is getting somebody to build in an area that isn't high growth, you might have to do a few more things that you wouldn't do to get somebody to move their trucks here.
Yep. Got it.
Marion County Conservation, and this was some of the projects just in and around town. And one of the things we talked about is the potential for I-Will. That doesn't look like it's going to happen this year, but really I-Will is the 3/8 of a cent sales tax that would go to a lot of conservation funding. But you still have REAP available, resource enhancement and protection. Again, similar to CAT grants, it's overly subscribed. It's one of those that you just kind of get in the queue and hope that you get down the road. Also, something that we mentioned in December as well is IDOLS has a water quality initiative that ramped up from a full funding from about $15 million to $30 million in just the last fiscal year. They don't have enough projects to spend the money. So they're looking for projects, and there's a variety of different programs, but really the focus is on urban and rural. There's an urban infrastructure project that is a much smaller pot of money, and it's pretty oversubscribed, but folks are successful. Urban being, going after and getting permeable pavers when you see in these communities, bricks on a sidewalk. Typically those are permeable pavers that you're trying to offset stormwater, or those nice bioswales, or those sorts of things. That and really from an economic development standpoint, you get the twofer, right? You might be helping out your waste treatment system, but really you get a nice aesthetic thing that, and people don't grasp that it's twofold, that the infrastructure is working for you, but it's also very aesthetically pleasing. There's a lot of money out there for that. They typically operate in RFP formats. For some other clients, I'm actually working with IDOLS on how to do this in a much more programmatic manner like we've seen in other states, where it's much more service-based. So that's something they're very open to, of you bring a set of projects that have set parameters around them related to nutrients and soil retention, because that's what the authorization of the money is. They're getting much more, because there's so much more money, being flexible in this. Also, USDA Rural Development Community Facilities Loan and Grant Program, that's extremely broad. I think we threw that on there simply because we were talking about, some, facilities, bathrooms, picnic tables, that kind of stuff. That's something that's available. It's extremely a broad-based program that would be available as well. I think one of the things that drew the most interest from people is, the potential for, and this gets back to the budgetary flexibility side of things, is the potential for wetland and stream mitigation. Again, your proximity to Des Moines is important, because wetland and stream mitigation under the Clean Water Act is the concept of somebody's going to go tear down and have a large, let's say a linear project. The electric company wants to put a big transmission line. Every stream they cross, every wetland that they impact, they have to offset that environmental impact. Well, the preference under the Clean Water Act is for people to buy credits. So what, and I put on there, Dallas County has been very successful with, is the BOS Wetland Bank. And Dallas County operates their own wetland bank, and they use it simply to offset their road budget. So rather than buying credits at market value, they essentially save themselves money because they have their own credits to offset their impact. However, as I mentioned in December, there are scenarios where you could operate it yourself, or you could operate it as a joint venture with somebody, where you're going and building wetlands, and essentially what you're doing is all the development in West Des Moines, when they have to go buy credits, if you're the ones that are available, they have to come buy from you, and it becomes a revenue generator. You have that opportunity simply because the service territory, it's all based upon your service territory set by the Army Corps of Engineers. Your service territory covers all of Des Moines. So it's not as speculative. If we were in Montgomery County and Red Oak, and it actually isn't the service territory of Omaha, going and building a bank and putting that kind of money into it doesn't make sense. Here, you can actually go build pretty aesthetically pleasing, and it doesn't necessarily have to be on county land. I mean, you can do this as a joint venture where somebody goes and identifies voluntary landowners that want to go build wetlands, and then it becomes a revenue generator for you as well. And you still can allow people to hunt, fish, bike, as long as you're maintaining the ecosystem within that. There's a compliance side.
Dustin, do you know what Dallas County currently does? Do they have a joint venture?
They don't. They operate it themselves.
Okay.
They actually kind of mess up the market because when I go by, I could pull it up right now for you. The system is actually called Ribbits, which is the Regulatory In Lieu Fee Banking Information Tracking System. But when I go look to see what's on to buy, typical in the Des Moines area, a credit is going to cost me about $70,000. Theirs is like $35,000. So when I make an assessment for a client as to buying credits, and you can't buy them from them, that was the problem, because they hold them for their projects. So they mess up the market. So you have to take them out of your analysis as to what a credit is. But I had a client recently in Des Moines. They had to pay $200,000 for 1.5 credits, but they do it because it's the cost of doing business, because you can't go dig in the ground until you've made this offsetting environment. And I'd be happy to get you in touch with the folks in Dallas County who do it. The key is you have to have upfront money to go build it yourself, and then you have to have the compliance side,
right,
which are the two components.
You have to maintain it.
That's typically why people do it as a joint venture, is you find somebody who goes and does it, and then you get you get a portion of the profit back as the credit. So
how many are there, offhand, around us?
None. Because now I can tell you multiple states that do it, multiple counties in different states that do it. Iowa is a small state. Our environmental impacts are small. So typically this kind of stuff hasn't occurred here as much as you would find in Illinois, Minnesota, Indiana. And the reason is that you're seeing much more activity in the space is really related to renewable energy development. It's related to wind and solar projects, because as they take things out, you have to make this assessment.
I think it's good to know that this exists, but you're right. Without a major growth curve, this becomes really speculative, though.
Well, and here's the thing, though. The folks that do these as joint ventures, and I'm happy to make the connection for you, they can give you what the analysis is.
That would be good, because if I'm Dallas County, I get why I did it, because everything's expanding west of Des Moines. And even I can buy a credit for a project in another location.
Yeah,
right.
But the beauty of your location is you can actually force people in Dallas County to buy from you.
Oh, sure, we can become a market.
But you don't want to be speculative and outlay a bunch of funds that you don't know what you're going to get in return without the expertise, and maintain for 10 or 15 years.
Yeah.
But if somebody could come in and say to you, geez, here's 15 different sites we could consider around the state, around the county, to do stream and stream and wetland mitigation, and then come to you and say, okay, would you be interested? The folks that I've worked with in the past, you don't pay anything. They go make the assessment, but as a joint venture, you know, they're basically operating as an agent for you to go develop
It'd
these
be
things.
nice if we could partner with the Corps and do that, since 38% of our acres already don't produce property taxes, but.
Is there a minimum acreage that makes that profitable, or?
Yeah, it's a good question, you know, because I was dealing with Cedar Rapids with the river. They wanted to do stream bank mitigation, but what we found, and I'm not an ecologist, but what you find is in Cedar Rapids, they don't own all the riverfront.
Right.
So we were going to have to go in and do 100 linear feet, and then we would take a break for 200, and then the problem is then, is if I fix 100 feet, I'm typically making that section perform better, but the water's gonna likely move faster. And if I don't then own the next 200 feet, all I've done is caused a problem for then the next 300 feet I do work on. So you really have to have a, you know, long linear, because ultimately too, when I break that up between 100 and then 300 and then say another 100, my regulatory costs are the same for each of those. So it doesn't make sense for me to go get a permit on this area, this area, this area. Really what you want is a long area where you're going to get the permit one time.
So you control this area that you're mitigating, or you're.
Yeah.
What's the liability if, you know, you're allowing people to fish, hunt, or whatever?
Great question. Our DOT got fined a couple of years ago, 200 grand, because typically you'll see this, think of the Highway 5 around the ring around Des Moines. You see those little wetlands in between, you know, some of the four-leaf clovers. Those are supposed to be maintained, and if you look at them, most of them are just mud pits. And a lot of DOTs get dinged because what that's called is on the tier is a permittee responsible mitigation, meaning that the DOT said, we're not gonna go buy credits, just trust us, we're gonna go build these nice sites. Well, they're not functioning. So then EPA comes in every couple of years, and a bunch of states will get dinged. The client I work with the most in this, they do 15 different states where they manage the DOTs, all those different permittee sites, because they go build them and say, oh, you know, we build roads, we don't, you know, make sure the ducks show up in these wetlands. But it's just a matter of, yeah, you have to maintain it within certain compliance period, which is typically 10, 15 years.
Yeah, I'm intrigued on it because I do see growth. I do see growth in our county.
Yeah.
So the joint venture part, I would like to know more
And
information.
stealing money from Polk County, how about that?
Yeah, yeah.
Assuming that we're in the,
Hey.
our service area is in the
Let's get on the mic.
metro area, wouldn't other county service areas overlap, including Dallas counties, and if they want us open theirs up to others purchasing credits, aren't we then in competition?
Correct. And it's also, you have private banks that are developed too. That's the analysis side of it. It's not just, hey, could you go build these? That's one portion of it. It's, could you go build these plus what other opportunities are in the service territory?
Yeah, Tyler, your question is spot on. I mean, we'd have to run the numbers. Because the biggest hole, and Steve, you hit on it, in addition to building it and maintaining it, because that would be ours, if you don't get anybody to buy the credits, that's just sunk cost. And then the maintenance side and the regulatory side becomes something you're just spending money year over year. If Dallas County outbids us for
and
those
typically
credits.
that's why local governments use a joint venture.
Yeah.
Is so that the risk isn't on them in these.
Right.
Is all you're saying is, yes, please go do this on our behalf. The only portion for you is if you build a big enough site and you want public access, you might say, well, it's technically going to be owned by the county conservation board.
Right.
But you're gonna have an operational agreement with your JV person to maintain it for you.
Right, but they get a portion of the.
But they get a portion of the profits. Yeah. But then again, you wouldn't have to, in that scenario, you wouldn't necessarily have to then put it in your budget to maintain like you do currently on county-owned land. That would be a portion of the sale of the credits, maintaining that as well.
Sure. You can understand my carbon credits are similar. I mean, I'm sure you're familiar with carbon credits. Maybe one day there'll be a county program for carbon credits.
Carbon credits are squishier than this.
Oh, yeah.
Because there hasn't been a set system yet to
Europe
determine
has
the
one, but
value.
we don't have it, yeah.
Thank you, Dustin, I
Yeah.
appreciate you explaining that further.
And I'll be, a lot of this stuff I've already gone through too. On the Pella housing project, you already have a developer working on this, and, part of the problem in especially housing projects is a lot of the IFA programs in particular and USDA rural development have really trended towards homeowner renter driven. You've seen projects, places in Pleasantville, Lacona, where back in the day USDA, the old Farmers Home Administration, they funded more multifamily housing. They've really moved away from that. So that can be really tricky. That's why working with a developer is far better, because it's really difficult if you're trying to go after homeowner focused things to pull together 20 people to say, okay, you guys all build your homes together, go get your loans and then come back to us. It just doesn't work that way. And as I mentioned, the workforce housing tax credit is the best example of that from a developer focused standpoint to access this. But again, supporting things, Iowa Great Places, from a attraction standpoint, and CDBG, that's Community Development Block Grant. Because of your population, you have a better chance of accessing those funds. Typically, that's related to infrastructure, again, water and wastewater. Sorry I'm talking so long.
No, it's all right, no worries.
The Pleasantville transportation upgrade, I think this project, and it may be done at this point, but it was a pretty small project, 250, 150,000, something like that. And one of the things, I actually did this with a client yesterday on a USDA grant, and based upon their structure, they are only eligible for 20% of their project cost, so they would get $250,000 in grant. And this is a pretty large, sophisticated company. And in this instance, what I would kind of tell you, similar as I told them, is the juice really worth the squeeze? For $250,000, is it worth trying? Is the project important enough that you want to wait for grants, or is it something that you could utilize TIF, support the city's efforts in TIF to get the project done quickly, so that you see the benefits of it at the back end?
Right.
And that's just some of the analysis you have to do individually on some of these projects. So, not to say that $250,000 is nothing, but, when you're looking at much larger investments and in the long term, you have tools available to you now that you can get projects done. So you just really have to think about the long and short term. My last thing I'll share is, when I said at the beginning, one of the biggest keys, the two biggest things I find is you have to have a person or a group of people who are passionate. There's a reason that, the Empower Rural Iowa initiative included the Rural Development Initiative from the state. There's a reason that it included leadership, because typically at any of these projects I see amongst my small chambers across the state, you have to have a person that's a driver. And that, in the Port of Dubuque, for those of you, and I wish I should have put pictures up there of what the Port of Dubuque, and that's where the water, the conference center is, with the hotel that has the water park, the casino, Flex Steel has their office there. Before that, it was just god awful for anybody who remembers. And it took them, and I gave these examples up there of how many different programs they had to layer to get that. And it's also where the Mississippi Smithsonian is as well. Yeah. And so it just gives you an idea of, that was really driven by now their assistant city manager, Terry Goodman. She just was very diligent and bulldogish in identifying different funds to leverage. Now, obviously that project is massive, but I see this very similarly, that it's great to have an idea, but you really just have to have that flexibility to say, okay, how can we go get this money to pay for this? And then how do you have that person that stays on top of that and keeps the diligence? Because as you've said, even on the mitigation side, it's great to go do this, but understanding that you're taking a risk for 10 years of compliance, same kind of thing. When you go get a $3 million grant from HHS, you have to manage that for a 3-year time period. So, questions, comments?
Very good. Dustin, thank you. That's
Yeah.
very good recap.
Yeah.
And I've got a couple notes that I'll connect with Kelly with.
Absolutely. Perfect. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Carla?
And certainly anybody that wants Dustin's contact information, I'm sure he's fine with me sharing that with you if you have questions about something that he's talked about.
There you go.
Yep, there it is. One of the things I thought we'd pause for just a second, if there's any of the communities that wanted to provide any updates on any projects they have going on. Hearing none. We'll move forward. As you know, every year we visit with our existing employers, so I thought I'd give you some snapshots of kind of what we've done this year. We visited with our existing prime industry over June and September of 2021. This is part of a statewide Best of Iowa program. We are actually in the process of redesigning the program for 2023, so that's an exciting upgrade, I think, that will be happening to that program and our VRE efforts across the state. Also, I go out to various other different sources to get other data and information to kind of give you a snapshot of what's happening. A little bit of the findings from this year. On the positive side, we see that our industry is continuing to expand. One of the things we see as well is this area, our county, Iowa, has not suffered as bad through COVID-19 from an economic standpoint, mostly because of our essential industry and manufacturing base. And the other thing that we're seeing is that there is really an opportunity for entrepreneurship that could drive some of the long-term growth for developing the next set of prime companies that come around and also help to diversify our economy. Some of the weaknesses we see are obviously everything that everyone's talking about. One of the prime barriers most of our industry is facing is finding right fit employees for the positions that they have open. The other issue, as far as both profitability and growth, is the impacts with supply chain issues. And long term, one of the trends we're seeing that is something that we need to be aware of is this shift that some industry is making to remote workers and to putting facilities in metro areas to solve that workforce issue. So it really provides a challenge to our rural communities to be able to attract and retain those workforce members. A little bit about our people. As we talked about population growth, although the Des Moines Metro had some good solid population growth, we are just on the fringe of those. We did not necessarily have population decline like much of rural Iowa, but we're just basically holding steady as far as population, which provides an opportunity hopefully for some growth with some of the things that we've talked about in housing. You can compare how our age distribution compares to the nation. You can see we have slightly more in that kind of older area and slightly less in the kind of college age and a little bit less in the workforce age. So although we kind of outpace in the 0 to 4, it's kind of interesting that then in those next age groups we're a little bit less and of course a little bit more in older citizens. When we look at our households, the one I thought was interesting was we actually ranked 14th of all Iowa counties for our percentage of households married with children. So that's something to understand that we have a fairly high compared to other counties in Iowa. Percentage of that's what the makeup of our households are. You'll also see that 10% of our households are receiving some type of food stamps or SNAP subsidy. Looking at our population by community, the most intriguing thing that I don't think gets talked about much in Marion County that happens is the rural unincorporated population. That is the top line that you've seen probably the most growth of any area in the county is that unincorporated part. Could be housing around Lake Redrock, could be housing around the outsides of our communities, but that has remained fairly constant. And you see slight growth in Pella as well as Pleasantville. Many of our other communities have either maintained or declined. A little bit about poverty rate. You can see it's gone up fairly significantly in 2020 from 2000. And the average wage per worker as well as per capita and median household income, those are still fairly old data. With COVID, it seems like some of the data has taken a little while to get out there. The wage trends, what we're seeing is you see there on the far left, the Marion County average worker annual wage, and you see on the far right, the US average annual worker wage. And what you see in the middle is the increase that we've seen in Marion County over the preceding 4 quarters. So there has been a fairly significant 1-year increase in our wage level. However, it is still significantly below what it is in the US. A little bit about components to population change. Marion County ranks 21st of all counties as far as our percentage of the white population. You can see that 71.8% of our Hispanic population actually comes from Mexico. And they're a fairly significant part of our minority population as far as looking, you can see there the other minorities. The other area that has seen a little bit of growth over the last 10 years is that last line, the 2 or more race groups has seen quite a bit of increase from what it was in 2010. Looking at the top, you see migration, and you can see that we've had a negative net domestic migration and a little bit of a positive international migration. And unfortunately, births are not outpacing death. So those are components which all factor into some of that kind of population change. Now going to most of what we talk about is our businesses. You can see there a breakdown, and this is these 2 slides are always very interesting. This is the number of businesses by stage. And you can see how Marion County compares to Iowa. We have just over 1,000 establishments in 2020 in Marion County, and we've increased 41 since 2015. But then if you look at this, you'd say, oh, we should spend all our energy in small businesses because they make up the majority of the businesses. But when you flip and look at the information by jobs, you can see that why we did our economic gardening program, why we continue to invest in stage 2 businesses, are that a little over 1/3 of our jobs in the county are in stage 2 companies. And of course, almost another 1/3 is in the large companies, which is not a shock to anybody that knows we have some fairly large employers in the county. But oftentimes people forget about those stage 2 companies, which really have some growth potential to become the next size up of companies. This is a chart you've seen over the years quite often. We now rank 36 out of 3,141 counties in the US for our percentage of jobs in manufacturing. You can also see kind of the average wage per job in each of those sectors and where we rank in the state of Iowa as far as the wage. That is the wage ranking. So you can see we're 6th as far as manufacturing wage, where in some of our other sectors, we're not quite as competitive as what we might be in a manufacturing sector. So some of those sectors that are having problems getting workforce, that could be why the average wage is less than other counties. So therefore, if you're trying to attract somebody, even just to drive in from a neighboring county, there may be some challenges with those wage levels. New jobs, this is a little bit different time frame. This is 2010 to 2020. You can see how many new manufacturing jobs are added. And that's really been the only area of positive job growth except for in the professional and business services area. This we compare, this is an interesting one. We're looking at primary sales areas for our entities that are located here, and this is kind of a 2-part slide. So you see Iowa on the one side and Marion County on the other side. You can see that most of our entities are selling to either a regional or local market, meaning Iowa, Midwest market. About 17% are selling outside to a more national market or international market. And then you see we have about 29% of our entities that are in the nonprofit government space. And you can see how this differs from Iowa, where there's only 40% serving that local regional market and 27% selling outside of the region. Then what you see on the next stage is what has happened from 2019 to 2020 in jobs. And Marion County has not seen as much job loss in those different sectors as what we have seen statewide. So statewide, those selling to external to the region have lost a lot more jobs than the ones in Marion County. So I think it's an interesting thing to talk about to showcase the sustainability of our companies and why there continues to be a workforce shortage here, is that we were able to retain our jobs through most of COVID. International sales, when we talked to our prime industry, they either reported that 38%, nearly 40% of them reported that their international sales were still increasing, where 62% said they were stable. We had none of them that said their international sales were declining. And we asked them, where do you sell your products to? These are the top markets. It pretty well drops out from there, but definitely Canada, Mexico, Europe, and South America are the prime areas that our companies are selling to. When we ask them about, have you introduced a new product or service, this is really getting at, are they innovation companies? Are they, always keeping their product fresh and new to the market? We can see that we outpace introductions in the last 3 years. Not quite as optimistic about the next 2 years, but I've seen this over the many years that I've did this, and it always seems that our companies are very conservative, so they maybe are a little less hesitant to believe they are, and then in the end, when I ask them, well, what'd you do over the past 3 years, a lot of them have introduced new products or services, so that keeps their products and services relevant, helps keep them competitive in the marketplace. We asked them too, this is exciting, I think, but also challenging. We asked them, do you plan to expand? And 60% of the prime companies that we interviewed in 2021 said, yes, we plan to expand. Now you can see that when we interviewed them in 2020, only 31.3% indicated that. And again, you have to understand that 2020, when we were talking to them in the summer, that was right after COVID had hit, and it was, kind of a stressful time. But certainly the 60% expansion is a great statistic to have. 80% of them are thinking about purchasing an existing company. So they're looking into that. That's one of the strategies they may use. But the challenge in this slide comes to the bottom, that 50% of them said they will not consider the community for expansion. And the reason being workforce availability. So there are companies now feeling like they cannot expand here because they cannot find the workforce that they need. So that's a challenge for all of us with all of this that's happening with housing and population, to help our companies to understand that they can expand here and that there is the ability to attract and retain their employees.
Carla, was it asked if they were purchasing an existing company, if that was locally or statewide? Or?
No. Most of them, it would not be local, I can tell you. Most of them were looking at companies in other regions of the state or the nation. Most of them not international. Most of them were looking at US-based companies to obtain in their market space and their competitive area. As far as education attainment, you can see some statistics there. We rank 25th as far as high school diploma or more. We rank 15th when it comes to bachelor's degree or more. But you can also see some of the challenges. There's 19.8% of our folks that have graduated high school but have never taken any kind of college beyond high school, so that's a training opportunity. So some interesting challenges there. When we look at our talent, our labor participation rate is at 87%, which is high as compared to the US. Our unemployment rate is 3.1 in 2020, which of course is low. It's even lower today than what it was in 2020. And then looking at employers with recruitment problems, when we talk to them, yes, 80% of them said yes. And I will tell you the other 20%, I don't believe it was because they were not having recruitment problems. I believe it was because they were not currently hiring. So there was a lot of them that said, well, we're not having recruitment problems because we're not hiring. If we were hiring, we would be having problems. And you see some of the positions that they're having difficulty to fill. The one that always is interesting to me is sales. That always comes up. We've heard a lot statewide about engineers and CNC and machine operators. You don't hear as much about sales as we tend to hear here, I think. So that's a new one that kind of has came up over the last couple of years that I think is an opportunity for training that maybe we need to look into to help them fill those sales roles. Because obviously with growing companies, sales become an important component. One of the things that we've been working with Iowa State Cirrus on is the iWin project. We've identified 5 groups that we've taken a deeper delve into understanding how do we handle this talent strategy, whether it's in commuters, increasing the number of people coming into Marion County from other counties, whether it's out commuters, whether it's getting our residents who are going to other counties to work to stay here, whether it's females that are currently in the home that might not be in the workforce because of childcare, whether it's part-time workers and opening our companies up to being more flexible and having more opportunities for part-time work for some of those early retired or maybe stay-at-home moms or folks that only want to retire or only want to work part-time. And then the other area we're looking at is individuals with disabilities. There's some different things that have gone on. There's some opportunities to help with some of the barricades for them to be in the workforce. When we look at out commuting, so that's people living in Marion County, residents going, where do they work? A little over 9,000 of them work in Marion County. So people live here, work here. And we have a little over 7,000 that live here and work somewhere else. And you can see how many of them, because we often hear about Polk County. We have about 3,000 people who are Marion County residents each day that go to Polk County to work. You can see how we compare with our peer average. So, very similar somewhat to what our peers are. When you look at in commuting, so that is people coming from places to work here. Where are our workers coming from? You see, again, that 9,000 are people who live and work here, but you're seeing 8,000, almost 500 people working here that live that live elsewhere. I'm sorry, that should have said living elsewhere. And then in Polk County, you have 12.3. So you can see in the previous slide, we had 18% of our people, or 3,000 people going to Polk County to find jobs. And you can see we're attracting a little over 2,000 of Polk County residents here to work. So the net is about 1,000 difference.
Hey, Carla, do you have any data from like people that are working from home? I just wondered if there's
not as much.
When did you do these? Do you know? Was this past year or was this recent?
This is 2020 data.
Okay.
So, you can see that we're slightly outpacing our peers when it comes to giving people to work here that are living in other counties. But it still is a challenge. Both of these provide us opportunities and hints of what things, trying to understand the barriers for why somebody's leaving here and working somewhere else, or why are people driving here. And one of the things our employers have told us anecdotally is that it's becoming more and more difficult to get these in commuters. As companies in other parts of the state are increasing their benefits, increasing their wages, then it makes it much more difficult to get people to get in their car and drive an hour or drive 30 minutes to come to a job that they might be able to find in their own community. So that's a challenging part for attracting in commuters. Out commuters, sometimes we understand it's right fit jobs. There may be jobs that they're going to that we don't have those jobs here, and that may be the reason. But there still is a good percentage of those that I believe, we just need to understand what those barriers are and how to market to them to understand the opportunities they would have here. What we start to see some of the time is that people, once they get kids and activities, that becomes one of those things that they start to question why they're commuting out. So how do we market to that and understand those? Here you can see the top locations for where people are going to, both residents traveling to work. As we talked about, Polk County is the #1 place. You see the other counties that people travel to for work. If we're looking at where do they come in from, Mahaska County, it's a little over 2,500 people from Mahaska County come to Marion County each day for work. You can see Jasper and Monroe are also feeders. You see all the way down to Wapello. And what we see sometimes with in commuting is those transportation lines where that 4-lane highways go is often what are primary feeders into the market because of the ease of transportation. So a little bit about our communities. This is just a little snapshot of retail sales and our retail sales per capita. You see how that's broke down over our communities in the county. And then we asked our prime employers, what are our top assets in the county? And on the left, you can see the things that our employers felt were the things in Marion County that are assets. So as we're marketing our communities and our county, these are things that we can talk about that they feel is going well. When you look on the right side, these are the things that they're struggling with. So you see a lot of housing, you see childcare on that list, public transportation being #1, and some other issues that they have with workforce services, and
So
those
what's-
types of.
So Carla, is regulatory enforcement, we do too much or too little?
I think usually it's not geared towards the county level of regulatory enforcement. I think it's geared towards state and federal
That's what it,
regulatory
yeah,
enforcement.
too
rules.
much.
Yeah, too much.
Just wanted to make sure we understood.
Yeah. As far as housing units per type, this was kind of an interesting one. I haven't done this one in the past necessarily. So it shows you how we compare across our communities as far as what type of housing they have, which I thought was kind of interesting to understand, where opportunities might be in growth by understanding what types of housing we have. Just pulled out some statistics for each of our communities as far as where their population growth is going, their education levels, poverty levels, employed. Most of our counties are very good as far as the percentage, as well as housing units that are owner occupied versus renter occupied. So you can see some positive things and some challenges. I mean, I think as far as education, most of our communities you'll see on these slides have increased the number of residents that have some type of education beyond high school. But some of the challenges come in those poverty rate numbers. So you can see some of the communities have had increased poverty levels, some have had decreased, but for the most part, most of them have increased, especially when we go to our smaller towns.
Carla, where is that information coming from, the population?
The population is from the census.
Okay.
So you can see one of the things that I pulled out from housing units for Pleasantville that was interesting that I noticed from 2010 to 2020, they increased their number of housing units by 30%, which for a small community, it makes it easier to have those bigger numbers, but still shows a positive growth trend. But when you look at poverty rate,
Yeah.
that's a really scary thing. And we talked about that last night at Leadership Redrock in Pleasantville, that Pleasantville is one of these communities, statistically, they're growing, they've got some real positive things happening, but yet they also have a lot of their residents at those poverty levels. So we listened to the Pleasantville Youth Initiative, which are doing some really amazing things as an organization to try to address that.
So Carla, what is the benchmark for poverty rate? What's the line?
I think the United States is, I think most, we rank, I used to know the rank, we rank in like, out of the 3,141, we're in that 2,800. So there's about, most of the counties in the United States have a higher poverty rate than we do.
Right. But when I'm talking, so income, so what's that income line there at that poverty rate?
I'd have to get that. That's the national, whatever it is.
Because it's changed since 2000, number
Yeah.
one. So I just a little flyer here, Brian, for you and Pleasantville. Remember, the rate has changed since 2000, so it's gone up.
Mm-hmm.
So that skews the data a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And for Pleasantville, you've got a smaller base
Mm-hmm.
to work with.
Yeah.
So that's one that you got to keep that in mind.
Yeah, that's like the housing. Like I say, they achieved a big number when it says 30%.
They don't have very much, yeah.
But if you don't have very many, then the percentages can be somewhat misleading.
So if the poverty rate now is at 55,000,
Mm-hmm.
Annual income or something like that, and it was at 45,000 in 2000, you've got inflation, you got all kinds of different parameters that is that apples to apples is the question.
Yeah, and I think they try to do it in real dollars at the time,
So they try to bring them to what, $2,000, something like that, normalized? Okay.
They're not the same, but they're supposed to be at the same.
They're trying to.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hey, Carla, what is considered the working age?
Generally it's 22 or 24 to about 64. So it's past college age and then not quite to retirement age. So you can see here too, again, percentages, but it is interesting, the education level, it does seem, regardless of what you're talking about, that we have done a better job at getting more of our people with some education over the last 10 years. Not sure where that's coming from, but it is pretty consistent with most, either they've stayed the same or they've increased on that one. And here you see Bussy. So there again, you see some pretty significant increases as far as education beyond high school, also significant poverty level, and
I hope that's not because we're watching our older population die off.
yeah, you don't know exactly, it's probably a multitude of things, but
Yeah.
that's probably a component of it.
Yeah.
Because we've seen that with less than a high school education,
Yep.
that number keeps going down, but that's because most of our, if you look at who are those people who have less
Right.
than a high school education, most of them are the elderly.
Yep.
And so that's where you can't really look at that number too heavily, because it's a
Right.
function of how our population is shifting, which was one of those first slides that I showed you.
Yep.
Here's industrial valuation per resident. This is with some peer communities in 2019. And then this is residential valuation per resident 2019. Cost of living is kind of one of the last things. It's interesting, of course, US cost of living is 100%, so you see that number. So that's, you know, we're slightly less than the cost of living in Iowa, which then, you know, gives us a little bit more purchasing power when you look at the bottom slide, because of that lower cost of living. And again, I just wanted to hit those dates coming up that we have, that we certainly would love you all to attend and be part of. And like I said, I'm in the process of finalizing this report. I've noticed a couple misspellings and things that I've got to go back over, and I will put all the sources to all of them. We had, for those of you that don't know, we had a little bit of computer problems yesterday here in the county, which caused a little bit of delay in getting this done. So we're just glad we had a presentation this morning to be able to share with you. So we will get that updated. I would guess over the next couple of weeks, we'll be having that on our MarionCountyIowa.com site. We'll update both the presentation and the written report, so those will be available to you.
Carla, excellent data. Thank you. Thank you very much. Anybody have any questions for Carla on that? A lot of good information. When we get it posted, I'm sure you get a chance to slice and dice and
we have
see
other
how it's
pieces of
relative.
information. I try not to overload you too much. I mean, most people would say that's an overload, but I could have overloaded you double that. So I tried to just pull out the things that I thought were different or interesting. Some of our data from year to year doesn't change much or doesn't tell much of a story. So I tried not to just put out a lot of stuff that we do have. So if there's something that you need for a grant application or things you're working on, we're happy to do that. The other thing that we are doing is that if there's an employer out there that's adding 20 or more jobs, we will help them to do an economic impact study. We just got ours yesterday for LDJ. Those are one of the services that we can provide employers out there. So just another tool that we have for them as they're trying to access some of these grant funds. You have to have that data in order to be able to do that many times, to have a good application.
Yep. Excellent. Very good. Thank you, Carla. Anything else on the agenda today?
I don't believe so.
All right. Very good. Board, any other questions for Carla or anybody in the audience?
Thank you, Carl, for it. It's great.
Yeah, very good.
Well, we certainly want to thank our employers. We would not get this data if they wouldn't take the time to meet with us, sit down with us and talk to us. So that's a very important part of the process, is those employers giving me usually about an hour of their time each year to go through this standardized survey process. We're hoping to make it, like I said, better for 2023 and to be able to provide better data that we want to know about, that the current survey tool does not allow us to do. So we're hoping to improve that, and a little bit of work with that. I'm involved in that task force, but I think in the end it will be a better business retention and expansion data and information for not only us here locally, but also the state, because one of the things that happens about the statewide BRE program that most local people don't realize is our board, my commission, looks at this data, but also this data gets aggregated statewide. And Director Durham is very good about looking at the data that's happening in the state, building programs around it, as well as our utility partners. They build their partnership programs around some of the input that we're receiving from these employer surveys. So that helps us to better statewide match up what our programs and services are with the needs of our employers, instead of just operating in a vacuum or something like that. And that's why the meeting on the 31st with Kaufman is exciting, because they want to create a pilot program, but instead of just going and creating a program, they're coming out and listening to the entrepreneurs in rural America to develop a program that could really help grow entrepreneurship.
I guess the thing I'd be interested in, Carly, is the outgoing to other counties. What types of jobs are they going to? Do we know that?
Not really.
Oh, okay.
I can suspicion some.
There's a lot of retail, maybe, or?
Well, I think a little bit of healthcare. I think we see a lot of, like, for technicians, specialized healthcare, that we don't have those services here, and they can get a little bit more money going into some of the Des Moines hospital systems. I think that's one area that we lose people to. I don't think
See, I'm
it's,
looking at, well, when it made me curious was Mahaska County and Jasper County. I'm thinking,
well, Mahaska County, they might be going over to Musco.
true.
So there's a specialized company
Or
there.
Pepsi, or,
You know,
yeah.
Jasper County, I'm not sure as much there.
Yeah. I could have seen it when Maytag was still around.
Yeah.
TPI was still around, but now
Yeah,
they're no
TPI
longer
would
there.
still have been operational during those years too. But there are other companies like Gombert's and other smaller, medium-sized companies in like the Newton area as well. But, you know, I don't know that they're going in those directions for, you know, healthcare type jobs. I think that's just more general administration, assemblers, those kinds of administration positions and stuff. It becomes very competitive. Like I said, I mean, it's I think getting people to commute from other places here will become more and more competitive. I think that'll be more and more difficult. And understanding why people are out commuting, it may be because they had a previous employment there, and maybe the spouse, and they moved here, but they're keeping their same employment. It may be because wages, we think that's a lot of it, wages and benefits.
If we were to offer more affordable housing, that might make up some of the.
Probably more options.
Yeah, that would be the in-commuters especially.
Right.
You know, I mean, there are a lot of people who commute here that I've talked to who said, we would love to live in Marion County. It's too expensive, so I'm gonna live down in Wapello County, where it's a lot less expensive to live than it is. And until recently, the gas price has been fairly low.
Right.
So commuting wasn't such an expensive thing to do.
What was did they tell you what was least expensive, or why is it least
Less expensive.
Taxes, or?
Just overall cost of housing and cost of living. You can bring up the cost of living index in some of those other counties, and they're significantly less than us. So, and you can break that down by like type of whether it's for groceries or whether it's for housing or those kinds of things, and you can start to see the differences of where the cost of living in other areas is a little bit less than it is.
I'm curious why like the cost of groceries would be that much cheaper 50 miles away.
Usually
housing.
groceries are not, but utilities and housing is.
Yeah. And the working from home, I think those statistics would be, it's interesting watching, I have a fellow associate that I work with, and he did a video of a manufacturer, and that, you know, even locally here, and he's like, I'm in this office, and he walked like a whole building, and there was, you know, the whole floor, and there was nobody in it. So
Yeah.
I think that data will be imperative to have, especially as we'll have businesses wanting to know how many really are working from home.
Yeah,
or
we've talked
bringing
about
them
that
back.
remote work thing. It's kind of a double-edged sword. You know, it could be good because if we can attract people here with their quality of life that like to live here, and then that opens up a possibility for where they can work. So that might be a positive thing. But on the flip side, we have employers that are having a hard time attracting certain right fit positions.
Right.
And so those tend to sometimes be higher paid positions. So then if all of our engineers are living somewhere else, or all of our, you know, high paying positions are living somewhere else and working remotely, then our communities are missing out of those folks being residents. And that's one of the things you see. I mean, we are fortunate we have a positive workflow. We are not one of those counties like a Warren County where the majority of our people do not work in our county. We have a positive workflow. We're one of the few counties around Polk County to have that.
Mm-hmm.
So we have more people coming to Marion County to get a job than leaving Marion County to work somewhere else. So that's positive, but how do we keep that number growing so we have more and more residents and less in commuting to make that number even better? And that's one of our challenges. That's why we took the housing project on many years ago, and now are excited to see all these projects going on, because we think it will make a difference with people and being able to helpfully not have that -0.08 population decline in when we look at 2030 data. We're hopeful that that will be a positive number, knowing that we're not going to be probably a Dallas County, but can we be a positive number that's a solid growth? You know?
I tell them, why would you want to drive into the sun both ways? I'm just saying, you know. So,
All right. Very good, good discussion. Thank you for coming. With that, is there a motion to adjourn?
I make motion we adjourn.
Second,
McCombs,
aye.
Ramey,
Aye,
Johnner.
Aye.
very good. Carla, do you have a next meeting date?
Yep, it's up on the board, June 24th, 2022.
All right, very good. We'll see you then. Thank you.